seconds today. I've got it.
Valley guy just.
Give you a handheld mic if that's okay. And usually just speak about 4 fingers away from it.
Okay.
It should be on the whole time. And we are in good shape.
We're ready. Okay.
So, hey Preston, Madeline, are we good to do the introductions?
All right, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. My name is Ian. We're at the Hinckley. Hello.
Sure.
For you? Do you want to just use it yourself?
I can do it. Yeah.
All right, welcome to today's forum here at the Hinckley Institute of Politics. My name is Ian. Before we begin, I just want to tell you all a little bit about the Hinckley Institute. The Hinckley Institute is a nonpartisan institute here at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. I wanted to begin by recognizing a special guest today. Roger Livingston, could you please stand real quick? We are incredibly excited to have Mr. Roger Livingston with us today and are grateful for his continued support of our students through the Roger Livingston Civility Scholarship. In honor of your commitment to our students, we dedicate today's forum to you. Today's forum is titled Dignity Over Contempt, and we want to thank the group Students for Dignity for their leadership in organizing this forum. Now, I will provide a little background. In 2018, Tim Shriver, chair of the Special Olympics and leader of the social and emotional learning movement, gathered together diverse groups of people who formed Unite, with the goal of easing divisions and preventing violence and solving problems in our country. Unite's latest initiative, the Dignity Index Utah Demonstration Project, is the first public effort to refine and test the Dignity Index, a tool designed to show us how we treat each other when we disagree and how our responses can either ease the division in our country or worsen them. This project has inspired the creation of Students for Dignity, a student group that is working hand in hand with Unite to deepen the conversation around dignity over contempt. We will hear from those who worked on the groundbreaking of this project. We have Dr. Samantha Ball, who is with the Kem Gardner Policy Institute as a senior researcher, Dr. Jesse Graham, the George S. Eccles Chair in the Business and Ethics and Professor of Management, and Students for Dignity co-chair Preston Brightwell and Madeline Jones. We are also excited to have Tammy Pfeiffer, Unites Utah's demonstration project leader, in the room with us today. Their discussion will be moderated by Dr. Morgan Lyon Coletti, Associate Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. I will turn it over to her now.
We're starting out so positive and dignified, getting cheers. Thanks everyone for coming. This is such an important topic. This is something we've all been thinking about a lot over the last 9 months. We're so excited. Students and people watching online are part of this with us. So Samantha, I want to start with you, with the Dignity Index, and give us really the two big questions about this, the what and the why. How did this, oh, and I gave you a how. What is the background of the project, and really why now? Why is this so important to have a project like this, to be talking about this right now?
Such good questions, Morgan. Yeah. First of all, I'm so excited to be even part of this panel. This has been a wonderful project for me to be involved with. It's been a really positive time for me to go back to my American government public policy roots and think about how we as a country can be more productive and positive in our policymaking and our conversations. And some research that we came across when we were writing up the research from this pilot was that I think over half, like 60 to 70% of Democrats and then Republicans, think that individuals from the other party are immoral. And so you can imagine how hard it is to come to difficult, compromises if that's how you're perceiving people on the other side of the the discussion. And so I can't think of anything more needed than showing dignity to others. I'm going to show a couple of slides. This an adventure story description is put forth by the Dignity team now and Students for Dignity. It says, can a small, outnumbered, underfunded collection of practical idealists and American patriots come together and by appealing to the best in ourselves and each other, awaken the power of conscience, challenge the culture of contempt, and elevate human dignity in all we do? And it's a very high call, and yet the Dignity Index has done a lot in a very short period of time since I've been aware of it. So when I came on board, it was part of the Utah pilot project. That was in September, but they had already created the Dignity Index itself at that time. It was based on some research by Dr. Donna Hicks and others who just put forth that dignity is one of the single most powerful motivating forces in our behavior. So when we say, you know, we are more alike than we are different, this is one of those things that just everybody feels. And if their dignity is repeatedly violated, then you feel kind of a sense of revenge, you know, far from wanting to compromise or find a way forward with this person, you just want to hit back. And so the dignity model is based on that, and the idea that in order for us to kind of move forward as a society from these polarized times, we need to start to show people more dignity. I just wanted to go through the project that I was a part of. We were kind of the research arm because what the Dignity Index wanted to do was just see if it would work. They'd created the index, but they didn't know if they could operationalize it so that people from different backgrounds, people from different perspectives and experiences could all look at a passage and say, this is dignified or this isn't dignified, and even like to what degree it's dignified or to what degree it shows contempt. It hadn't been in the real world in that way. So we were part of a pilot team that involved people from the Unite project. It involved people from the Eccles School, like Jesse, myself, and other colleagues at the Gardner Policy Institute, the Hinckley Institute, and others. So all of us formed a pilot team. And the first step, since it was September, and this was going to be used during the federal elections, was to hire some student coders and teach others what the Dignity Index was. So the Hinckley Institute put out a call, and I think over 100 students answered it. They were from all sorts of different backgrounds, and that was one of the things we intentionally wanted, was a diverse group. It was important if you're introducing this idea to the public, that no one perceives it as being more advantageous to one side or the other, or that would be more likely to show one side as more dignified and one side is less dignified. So we were looking for a really diverse group, and Hinckley found them. And then we created some training sessions, and students were given an overview of the index itself and what the different levels meant, and then also some canonical examples of just, you know, like Hitler and Desmond Tutu, like basic examples of what would be high contempt, high dignity, this kind of thing, to start to practice coding. And then went through several more training sessions to learn to code more. And directly after that, we started coding debates, which was probably the hardest one to start with because there's such a lot of language there. And something to know about how it's been used so far is that the Dignity Index has really been looking at specific just sentences, statements. So in a debate, there's so many statements, and what the team decided to do was to try to identify the most and least dignified statements that each candidate made. And the idea is that we're all kind of works in progress. We all say things that are dignified, some that are contemptuous, and to just pull out those that were really exemplary of those two sides and then code them. And so there was actually a whole team of us were watching because this was such a quick turnaround in order to provide feedback that would be useful in talking about the debates. So we gave like ideas of maybe this statement, maybe that one. Then a group of students chose the passages that were going to be coded. They were diversely politically distributed. Then another group of 3 coded them, and they were instructed to code them themselves first, and then also put down their reasoning for it. And so we were collecting data all along to try to inform whether or not this was working, but also if there were things that were unclear. Since it was a pilot, we could tweak the training or tweak the index itself in order to make it more clear what the levels were. And so we did that. The three coders would code it themselves. They'd give it their own code, and then they'd reach a consensus with the other coders. And then from that, there would be codes that were released to the press to discuss. And what we heard were a lot of people wanted to average these scores, and it wasn't really an average. Like, it couldn't tell you, on average, this candidate was in the contempt zone more often than this person, because we were just doing highs and lows from each candidate. And that was one of those things that you could tell people wanted you to average them. So it kind of reflects the polarization that was really what people were pushing for. But then we moved on to kind of weekly themes. We did social media and, we did concession speeches, et cetera. And we did that same coding process of 3 people doing it on their own, and then writing down their reasoning, and then coming to a consensus code. And over the whole training through these themes, at the beginning of the training, we were using the statistical collection. You could see that people were coming together on agreement with regards to what was dignified, what was contemptuous, and it didn't improve continually upwards, but the agreement on whether or not something was dignified or contemptuous was almost complete, and it narrowed in focus. In the beginning, people might be all over the map, and in the end, most people were trying to decide between 2 levels, and they were usually on the same side. So it was operationalized, and it was a success in this way. And even though we didn't get to the point where you got everybody on the exact same thing, that's part of the process. It's complex. Language is complex. Even if we got AI, I think there'd be a lot of complexity here. So it's been a wonderful project to work on. It's been fun to see what you guys have done with it, even past that. So.
Thank you for that great explanation of walking people through this process. It's been really fun to watch over the last several months. Jesse, one of the questions I had from the beginning, and I'd love to hear you talk about, is why isn't there, we are developing the score and we have contempt on one side and dignity on the other, why is there not a neutral score?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me show the full 8-point scale here. And Morgan's right, it's an even number, so we don't have a true neutral point. We basically see the line here between contempt and dignity between the 4 and 5. And we found that it was actually pretty easy to tell when there was contempt and when there wasn't. And a 5 is kind of the first level of dignity. And so I'll take you guys through the scale and show you some examples of some of the kinds of passages that our awesome student coders were coding. And I'm actually going to start at this midpoint here, between 4 and 5. And so 4 is kind of the first level of contempt. And so at level 4, you might be mocking the other side. You're saying our side is better than their side. Maybe they're stupid, they're incompetent, but they're not necessarily immoral. And so here's a passage. This is from Evan McMullen fundraising tweet, where he calls Mike Lee obstructionist. I would be a better representative for Utah's true values. He's beholden to far-right special interest groups. And so here is just a kind of basic kind of contempt. I'm better than this person. And 3 now gets a little more contemptuous. So now they're not just incompetent, they're not just worse, they're morally worse. And so at a 3, you're really starting to attack the other side's moral character. And so here's an example of something that was coded to 3. This is the famous basket of deplorables speech by Hillary Clinton, where she's describing Donald Trump supporters as irredeemable. She says, thankfully, they are not America, right? So there's this big distinction, like we are the real America. These deplorables they're sexist, they're homophobic, they're xenophobic, so they're really morally worse than we are, right? So that's a bigger kind of contemptuous distinction there. When you get down to level 2, now they're not just morally worse than you, they are evil, and they're an existential threat to your group. And so now that I've called out Hillary, I'll call out Donald. Here's one of his speeches where he's talking about left-wing mobs have torn down statues of our founders. Their goal is to silence dissent, to scare you out of speaking the truth, to bully Americans into abandoning their values, their heritage, and their very way of life, right? So this other group is now an existential threat to us, and they are evil. And then 1 is kind of the most extreme level of contempt. At level 1, you're basically saying it is our moral duty to destroy the other side. And with level 1, you start to see calls for violence. And so here's a pretty extreme example. This is from Leon Mugesera, who's now serving a life sentence for genocide in Rwanda. He said, "We, the people, are obliged to take responsibility ourselves and wipe out this scum. Do not be afraid. Know that anyone whose neck you do not cut is the one who will cut your neck." So it's not just us versus them, it's us or them. Okay, so again, that's kind of most extreme version of contempt. Now I'll go to the dignity side. So a 5 is kind of the first level of dignity, and it's really most remarkable for just the absence of contempt. And so if you're just putting forth your policy proposals, but you're not calling names to the other side, we would give that a 5. You think the other side has a point of view, they have a right to be here. You're not necessarily interested in engaging them in a dialogue, but you think they have a right to be here. At 6, so here's an example of 5. I believe this might be 6. Let's see. Oh yeah, okay, so this is Bernie Sanders went to Liberty University. He said it's important for those of us who hold different views to be able to engage in a civil discourse. There's too much shouting at each other. There's too much making fun of each other, right? So here he's specifically calling out that kind of contempt, saying, look, we disagree about things. Maybe we don't want to talk about what we disagree with, but we both have a right to our opinions. At level 6, you start to see more engagement. You're starting to engage with the other side. Let's talk about things, areas where we agree. You're not necessarily open to changing your mind. You're not necessarily wanting to talk about areas where you disagree. I always think of level 6 as kind of like the Thanksgiving dinner level, where it's like, okay, I know the topics that I need to avoid in talking to my uncle who I politically disagree with, but let's find some common ground and talk about the things where we agree. And so here's an example from John McCain. He said, the Senate is capable of bipartisanship. We've seen it before. The times when I was involved, even in a modest way, with working out a bipartisan response to a national problem or threat are the proudest moments of my career, and by far the most satisfying. So again, he's really endorsing this kind of engagement with the other side. At level 7, now we have even more engagement, and at level 7, you're even more open to the other side, and you're actually open to the possibility that you might be wrong. And so I always think of 7 as being I might be wrong. Like, I'm open, maybe you can convince me. Let's not just talk about the things where we agree, but let's actually get into it. Let's talk about the things where we disagree. And so this is a passage, this is Kerry Washington at GLAAD Media Awards. She says, we compete with one another, we judge one another, sometimes we betray one another. In our communities, we designate who among us is best suited to represent us and who really shouldn't even be invited to the party. As others, we are taught to be successful, we must reject those others or we will never belong. And so she's talking about how people are sort of pitted against each other. And again, she's willing to engage with these others. And now 8 is kind of the ultimate level of dignity. I do think of this as sort of the Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela level, where you really see yourself as part of every group. These group distinctions kind of disappear. You refuse to hate anyone. You offer dignity to everyone. So here's a passage from Desmond Tutu. He said, I look at some of these people who are described as monsters, and I think there, but for the grace of God go I. I don't say this because I'm some singular saint, but because I have sat with condemned men on death row, I've spoken with former police officers who admitted inflicting the cruelest torture. I have visited child soldiers who have committed acts of nauseating depravity, and I have recognized in each of them a depth of humanity that was a mirror of my own. And so that is really seeing the total human dignity in people, even people that others would just dismiss as horrific monsters. So again, that's the 8-point scale. And again, we're not trying to code people here. We were trying to code language. It's not the case that with a 1 you see disagreement, but with an 8 you see total agreement. You can have disagreement at any of these levels. This is really about how we disagree. And part of the idea of the Dignity Index is that we can passionately disagree with each other without showing contempt to others.
Jesse, before you move on, can you give us your empty calorie analogy? Because I know we can look at this and really think, yes, I want to live on the 5 through 8 scale, but especially social media, talking about politics, probably a lot more of us, a lot more of the time than we want to admit, live on that 3 or 4 scale. So give us the empty calorie analogy and why the 3 or 4 is so problematic. Because sometimes people feel like they have to call things out. They have to say certain things.
Right. Yeah, I wish I could say that I live in this 6 to 8 range all the time, but I, as all people, I travel up
You
and down
just went
the
up to
scale.
me because I said 5 through 8, so you're
That's my ideal, but most of the time I'm hovering right around 3 or 4. Yeah, so I think part of what's really hard about this problem is that contempt actually feels good. Like in the moment, it's not like we think, oh, contempt, ooh, that's bad. Like that's kind of maybe what we think we should do. But in the moment, if you see somebody score zinger points against the other side, it feels really good. And so, yeah, the empty calorie idea was that, it's sort of like junk food, right? It feels really good in the moment, but it's not nourishing over time. Dignity, I think, is sort of like health food. I mean, it feels like work in the moment. Those of us who have been coding these passages have started to use this as kind of a mirror for ourselves. And one of the things that most of us find is that you would think that we would just naturally start being dignified all the time, but more often than not, what happens is you kind of realize how contemptuous you're being and that you've just kind of naturally slid into it. And you have to actually stop and think, okay, what would be a more dignified response to, say, my kids, who I just said something contemptuous to, and so that's a very common experience that a lot of us have gone through. Do you want me to go through this one, or is this you guys?
You can go through it. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So yeah, I mean, so in terms of sort of action steps for this dignity index, we did this coding. And one of the things that we found, and the student coders were giving us a lot of great feedback about this, is that when they were engaging with the index, it really helps you to see that contempt is the problem. It's not necessarily disagreement, it's not political differences, those are always going to exist, but really it's contempt. And once you start coding these passages, you become really good at noticing contempt when it comes up, and you sort of start to think, well, that wasn't actually necessary to do that name calling, to mock that other side. They could have expressed their disagreement in a different way. So sort of noticing contempt, even just in your daily life, is the first step. Trying to use more dignity and less contempt in what you read, what you say, what you watch, what you support. I've noticed that I like watching late night comedy shows, and I just thought of it as comedy, and then I realized, like, boy, 90% of these shows are just absolute contempt to people on the right. Maybe that's not the best sort of spiritual diet for me. You start to expect dignity from the people who represent you, right? And so one of the things here is that if we want to be able to fix a problem, we have to be able to measure it. The dignity index is our way of measuring it. And what we hope is that over the long term, people really do start to notice contempt and dignity in their elected representatives and start to hold them accountable for that. So that's why we're trying to create this constituency that rewards dignity. Okay, so you guys want to talk about the student?
Perfect. And I think I want to get a little bit of your feedback before we go into the formal student presentation, as I knock things over. Because as Samantha said, over 100 students applied for these positions. We hired 22, but then there was a group who was really engaged, really excited, was doing extra work, extra debates, and then have stayed engaged. So Preston or Madeline, whichever one of you, what was so interesting about this project that made you want to be part of it and stay a part of it?
Yeah, so when I first saw that job application, I was like, this is exactly what we need. This is exactly why I'm in political science. It felt that the political atmosphere had really just gone downhill, and it was just the solution to that. And throughout the project, I started internalizing the index, which I didn't expect. I think I had always thought that I could pick out the problem, but I never recognized myself as part of the problem. And so I was just so excited about that concept, and I thought, gosh, I wish I had this when I was 18. I've seen a lot of classrooms just with heated conversations, and I was like, if I had the dignity index and if I knew how to pick out contempt and switch it around, I would have been able to speak up, or other students, if they had known about it, we would have been able to have a productive conversation instead of it just being a yelling match.
And hopefully this is a nice segue. Preston, do you want to talk about why you've created the Students for Dignity and what the goals, what you're hoping the future is?
Definitely. I think towards the end of the pilot project, Madeline and I had a discussion on how do we keep this momentum going, because with the close of that project, with the close of the election cycle, we wouldn't be actively scoring passages anymore. But this is, much more than just scoring passages. That's a huge part of it. But we were thinking about how can we continue to engage students on this project and how do we keep it going forward. So we kind of put our heads together and got with some of the other students that you guys will meet in just a second about forming the Students for Dignity group. And we wanted to capitalize on the fact that the Unite team, Tim Schreiber, Tammy Pfeiffer and Tom Roscher, they selected the University of Utah for that pilot project because they saw something special here, and we wanted to continue that. So we have organized it in a way where we can have this student group that will ultimately have training programs that can come in, so students of any kind can come in, learn the training that we had, they can learn to score passages, but are also going to be part of the bigger movement of holding people accountable to dignity and and holding ourselves accountable to dignity and trying to stamp out the contempt that exists in our world now. So we are in the process of creating this group, laying the foundations for that, but we have also been working closely with the Unite team to be the model that they want to replicate at universities across the country. And so that's what's something that's really unique to our University of Utah organization, is that we are going to be the example that they're going to try to implement, across the nation. We're hoping to get, chapters and student organizations across the country. And so that's our invitation to you guys as students to come be a part of it, because you'll be crucial in forming kind of the beginning of what that model looks like.
Perfect. Well, that concludes our moderated section. And now we're going to turn it to the students. We're going to continue the conversation.
Yes. We're going to do the videos.
Oh, we have a video first.
Yes. There we go.
Careless, reckless.
The radical leftist.
Another tax break.
This month, a national movement to encourage voters and politicos to reject contempt and reward dignity launched a pilot project here in Utah.
The project is simply called the Dignity Index.
The first ever Dignity Index was released today, scoring the messages from Utah's political candidates.
Based on the research of specialists in conflict resolution, the social impact initiative Unite designed a 1 to 8 scale to measure speech for dignity or contempt. The lower the number, the more contemptuous and divisive the language.
What we've found is that people are starving for a break from the contempt and hatred and divisiveness. And let's also be clear, the stakes here are high.
We have divisions that are not caused by disagreement. They're not caused because we think differently. They're caused because we have contempt.
Contempt actually kills curiosity.
Contempt takes away our ability to talk to each other, which takes away our ability to solve problems together, which can take away our ability to hold our democracy together.
This is not a score of how nice people are necessarily.
That's right. This is not about speech police. This is not about kumbaya group hugs. This is about how we speak in terms of elevating the conversation to something a little bit different.
There's really important efforts to change hearts and minds and have public discussions. But what I like about this is it focuses on behaviors, and behaviors are changeable.
To change behavior, you have to be able to define the behavior, and then you have to measure the behavior.
And so we've trained a group of ideologically diverse coders, liberals and conservatives, working together.
Looking at campaign letters, debate transcripts, speeches, social media accounts, and trying to quantify, is this speech dignified or not?
Hi, my name is Stephen Lenhoff.
Iridacunda Esperance.
Madeline Jones. Susie Estrada, and I am a student at the University of Utah.
In the training, what was really heartening to see is that we could get a lot of agreement across this broad ideological spectrum.
The great thing about it is everyone can understand it because it's really just about how we treat each other.
My thoughts about political dialogue have changed through this experience, internalizing that dialogue is a tool.
If you could just read the index,
it makes you think about, well, what's a more inclusive way to say this and a more inclusive way to say that.
And I think one of the most important parts of the Dignity Index is not what it's telling us about our politicians, it's about what it will tell us about ourselves.
It's funny that we designed something as a grading tool, but what it's turned out to be most powerful as is a mirror.
This changed the way I've had conversations with my children, with my neighbor, with my colleagues at work.
The Dignity Index changed me. And yes, you can challenge the scoring, but that inspires a conversation.
Any problem of the whole is going to require the whole. We're trying to not just open the door to civility and dignity, but open the door to the freedom to express oneself so that we can actually integrate the best of each other.
Think if we had a Congress that could talk to each other, that could actually solve problems. And part of the Dignity Index goal is to develop these types of relationships in disagreement to where we can solve problems.
When we learn how to communicate in our entire community, we're better off.
We're talking about a practical strategy for actually moving the country forward.
Those that don't know the Dignity Index should definitely explore it and get to know what it is.
The Dignity Index is our attempt to introduce to families, to businesses, and to politics a new way of solving problems by not treating others with hatred and contempt, but rather by treating others with dignity.
Awesome. We really like that video. That video just kind of illustrates exactly the whole purpose of what we're doing here. So my name's Stephen Lenhoff. I'm one of the members of the Students for Dignity group. I have two amazing people up here. They'll introduce themselves in just a minute. But for this last little section, what we kind of want to do is, we've talked about the what of the index, where it came from, why it's important, and kind of the background. So what we want to talk about now is what we can do going forward, kind of the purpose of the student group and how we can all apply this to try to make a real difference in our society, in our country. So to do that, I just want to share a quick personal story that I think illustrates really well how this index applies and works in our real everyday lives. So the 2020 presidential elections, my family had a campaign sign up in their lawn. It wasn't necessarily a super popular sign for the area that they were living in. And one night we had a few high school kids come through and they saw the sign, they stopped and they took it out and they started trampling it, kind of tearing it up, beating up the sign a little bit. And my next door neighbor, at that point he was probably a sophomore, maybe a freshman in high school. He didn't agree with the sign either. He was in support of the other candidate. But he saw this going on and he ran outside and he yelled at these kids and told them to stop. And the kids were like, "Are you serious? Like, you agree with this guy? You're okay with this sign being on your street?" And my neighbor, high school kid who kind of didn't agree with the person, he said, "It doesn't matter what I believe or what I think, and really what they think or they believe. They have the right to put that sign there, and you guys can't be trashing it. You shouldn't be doing that." And the guy, probably grumbling, left and took off. And I really like the story because to me, it illustrates both what we're trying to discourage as a student group here, but also what we're trying to promote. These kids came through. It was an us versus them mentality. We can't trust these people. We can't trust this sign. We got to get rid of it. Whereas my neighbor saying, you know, it's their country too. They have the right to be heard. Kind of illustrating those contempt and dignified side of the scale. And so that's really what we're about here. We think that little changes like this are what's going to help us bridge that divide and kind of bring the point that the video talked about. It's not our ideas or our sides that are dividing us. It's the contempt that's really doing that. So I'm going to hand it off to David here. He's got his own story, and he's going to take it from there.
Thanks. My name is David Witt, and applying the Dignity Index to our own personal lives is vital in how we shift, how we engage with other people. A few weeks ago, I posted a news article on my Instagram story talking about Mike Lee, and I commented about how I disagree with him and don't really like him, but I also left room open for dialogue, and if anybody wanted to comment on it, then please comment. And so somebody did, and they said they really like Mike Lee and they support him because he supports and defends the Constitution. And I replied respectfully, but with contempt. I didn't validate her. I didn't give her room to explain anything. And it was definitely an "I don't trust them," which is a number 4 response. And I went straight to talking about why I didn't like Mike Lee, And this shut down the opportunity for us to connect and for us to be vulnerable and to listen and learn from one another and to truly engage with the other side. So in retrospect, I wish I would have validated her and given her the space and opportunity to be heard and to really engage with me, and so I could engage with her. And like we talked about, that is the whole point of our program, and people in the community aren't really going to want to learn about coding or the Dignity Index if we aren't turning inwards and taking the initiative to self-reflect and take inventory and take accountability of how we're engaging with others and how much contempt or dignity we're using. So we want to invite you guys to all apply that right now and take a look at these dignity reflection questions. Think about who represents, entertains, and informs you, and the method you use to consume that content. How dignified or contemptuous is their language? What are your options for consuming more dignity and less contempt? And how would changing the dignity and contempt you consume affect the dignity and contempt you produce? And while you're thinking about that, we also want you to reflect on how you can commit to the dignity challenge and what you're going to do to be more dignified. So how can you commit to choosing dignity and challenging contempt? And can we follow up with you in a month to see if you guys are following through with this and how things are going, what your experiences are and things like that. So we'll just give you a couple minutes to reflect and think about that and write these things down, and then we'll open it up for a few minutes for an opportunity for people to share if they want to.
We'll just do like 1 minute, a few more seconds to kind of finish up, and then we'll keep going.
All right, everyone. So my name is Maddie Hare. I'm also one of the founders of the Student Project, and I'll quickly talk about an experience I had on social media. So I follow Governor Cox, and I saw something on his Instagram about how we should do more to protect people that were experiencing homelessness or something along those lines. And somebody commented, experiencing homelessness, that just shows what a woke rhino you are. And I thought for a second, how can I respond to this in a productive way? Because I realized that, attacking him in the way that I might have done a couple years ago wasn't going to be very productive for somebody who obviously was a lot more far right wing than I was. So I basically said to him, saying somebody is experiencing homelessness is a way to humanize someone. And I believe that he's just trying to make people feel included. And I don't think that's something we need to be attacking him for. And I felt good about that because, as much as I wanted to kind of dig at him for attacking somebody who was homeless, I thought it would be more productive to do that. And he had one more reply to me, and I had one more dignified response, and then it was over. And it says something when you can kind of shut people down, but in a very kind and dignified way. Like, they don't have anything else to say because they know that they're not going to look very nice if they reply. So I think we should encourage more of that discourse on social media. If you do find something very disturbing, instead of replying to it in the way that you would want to, in your instincts to attack someone. But I think we should focus on how can we change their mind rather than just make them feel bad about what they said. So that's my story about how I feel like the index kind of changed my mindset. And now we're going to talk about some of your guys' responses. So is anyone brave enough to share a time where they felt like they said something undignified? Yeah, go ahead.
Right, and the other side is almost objectively wrong. And as much as I would like to consider that I consider my own bias, I feel like I'm not taking dignity and contempt as much into account as I should.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think one thing that's really helped me is, watching talking points from the other side and just thinking consciously, like, am I attacking this person? Am I like making comments about this person in my head rather than the ideas that they're sharing that I disagree with? So thank you so much for sharing that. Does anyone have some example of when they said something very dignified and they were proud of their response to somebody that they disagreed with? It's great. We got more work to do. Yeah, go ahead.
So that's a great opening. If you live around here, which I'm assuming most of you do, you may have seen the anti-abortionists that like to stand outside of Planned Parenthood and other resources for women's health. And they like to talk to you and explain their point of view. And, it's very easy to want to be angry at them and yell or fight or honk or do whatever. But
what I've found is, it's just sort of interesting psychologically and socially to hear what they have to say, but the best thing you can do is listen and say, that's great, that's your perspective, but it's not for me. And it allows people to utilize the platform that is everyone's with speech without being combative or disrespectful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's great, and like we mentioned earlier, the Dignity Index is not necessarily about working to agree with other people, but rather how you address differences that you have. But on that note, I did want to say that this project kind of inspired me to write this paper about how it was in one of my research classes, and we did a study and figured out that intellectual humility is highly correlated with moderate political beliefs. And that's not necessarily because you feel like you listen to the other side and suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, they're right, but more so that you can at least understand where they're coming from. And I think that's a really important thing when you are addressing people, is you look at them as a human instead of something on the other side that doesn't have emotions, that doesn't have, the willingness to be good. So thank you so much for sharing that. And let me think if I have any other questions. Do you have one?
Well, I just want to know, after doing this reflection, does anyone have a quick response to any of those 3 reflection questions? Made you think about something or a point you wanted to share from those? Or the dignity challenge questions here? If we don't, that's totally fine. But we've all done this reflection, this challenge. This challenge and this reflection is really what we think can drive this difference. It's one thing to say we want other people to have more dignity, but you can't really do that until you've done this yourself. And so if you had a section to do it now, if you can, when you go home or something, just to keep thinking about these kind of ideas, this is something that will really help drive an internal thing. It has for me, and I believe for the rest of the people involved here. So we really, really encourage you to do that and share it if you can, because it's something that will make the biggest difference as we go forward.
What is one thing you guys can do to be more dignified? Somebody's got to have something. Yeah, go ahead.
I think in conversations with people that you might disagree with, not acting out of defense, but acting out of understanding is something that can promote that dignity, because it can be really easy to just be super defensive and kind of shut down what other people are saying. But I think if you give them the time that you want them to give you in presenting their perspective, then it can just promote more dignity and hopefully leave less room for contempt.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the humility thing I was talking about, where if you're willing to at least hear them out, that says something good about your character. So thank you. Now we're going to turn it over to Tammy, who has been a huge help in this project, and we appreciate her so much. So everyone welcome Tammy.
And I don't want to stand in the way. So thank you for being here. This is one of those moments as a parent and a grandparent where you're going, my baby's all grown up and they've become rocket scientists. Only as my babies have all grown up and they're changing the world. So thank you for that. Sometimes I feel like the world and the society that you are now graduating from college and moving into is not the world I want you to move into. And talk about self-reflection. It's my generation. It's people my age that have created some of these structures that are causing the harm to our society. And so I look to you. I look to you and your generation to move us in a better direction. And this is something we had not anticipated when we started the Dignity Index project. We did not, and we thought we'd hire some students who were really good at what they did. You would do the job, you would finish, and you would, go home and do something else and graduate and do something else. We did not anticipate the enthusiasm or the passion that you've brought to the project, but that you have felt as part of the project. And so we're really excited about the Students for Dignity Club. We do intend to replicate this. This is again, a direction we didn't know we'd go. We are going this direction now. We want to invest in these student groups and student clubs. We've had some students from the University of Southern California who are interested in starting a club there. And it almost invariably, when someone hears about the Students for Dignity Club, they say, how can I do it? I talked to the president of Southern Utah University yesterday. She says, get me the information. We're gonna get a club on campus. So I have so much confidence in you and in your generation to help shift us out of the problems that my generation and others have helped, unfortunately, create. But the future is very bright because the future is right here and right here. So thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Preston, you're at the back of the room, so I can't point to you. Madeline, thanks for what you've done on this project. And thanks in advance for what you're going to do to help us move this work forward. Happy to take questions and also happy to be available afterwards. Love to have you visit the website, dignityindex.us. And we are adding materials and resources based on this inventory right here that you have today. We're going to put that on the website and invite other people to take the challenge and join the movement. This is our dignity movement, so thank you.
If I may, just before we wrap up, we have a couple materials over here in the corner before you leave of importance. There's a QR code back there. We'd really, really, really love anyone who's interested who wants to join the group to scan that QR code. That's the best way to sign up. But we thank you all for coming out. And like I said, Tammy will be around for questions and anything if you guys want after. But please scan that QR code. It's a really cool QR code. You'll like it.
And we have pizza out back, so if any of you are interested, please go eat some. We don't want any leftovers.
Dignity pizza. Yes.